Good evening, Srinivasan sir, and good evening, everyone else. My name is Francis George. I'm the Secretary of Thrissur Management Association, TMA in short. I'll be the master of ceremony today. Let's get started with a silent prayer. Thank you. Now, may I call upon the President of TMA, Engineer Vinod Manjula, for the welcome and presidential address.
Thank you, Engineer Francis. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Chief guest of the evening, Mr. T.P. Srinivasan, IFS, former Ambassador of India. Dr. C.A. Shantakumar, past President of TMA and Branch Committee Membership, Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, referred to as IACC. The members from IACC, past President's Management Committee and members of TMA, members of Young Leaders of Thrissur, student chapter members, invited guests, and my dear friends. TMA and IACC share a very close relationship, and every year we do joint projects. And this year too, I'm happy that we are doing a project joint event before the end of our term. As you all know, our TMA term ends with our AGM next month, and the proposed AGM date is July 25th. And TMA is in the process of wrapping up this year's events. We had in the month of June the student chapter conclave and the YLT speaker meet, and all these were well appreciated. We have two more major projects to be completed before our term ends. One is the waste management in Natiga, and the master plan for Velangankunna, where we already had a sitting with the collector, and one more sitting is due with the MLA, Mr. Xavier Chitlapalli, and the Panjat members at Kila on July 3rd. So with that, we will finalize the master plan for Velangankunna, which is an innovative project as long as TMA sees it. Friends, I heard a speech by Mr. Srinivasan where he says, diplomats are often defined as honest gentlemen who lies abroad for his country. I'm sure a seasoned diplomat or chief guest would have faced many challenges in his career and played a vital role to enhance the image and goodwill of India. Today, we see a new geopolitical scenario emerging in the world. We see new power centers being formed. We are so interdependent that a small conflict in one part of the world affects all of us. And to dwell on the new order and understand it better, we have our chief guest, Mr. T.P. Srinivasan, IFS, to address us on the topic Indo-American relationship in the wake of Russian-Ukraine war. Welcome, sir, to this webinar.
Thank you.
I would also like to welcome Dr. C.A. Shantakumar and friends from IACC to this webinar. TMA hopes to continue a warm, cordial relationship with IAC in the years to come. And to my friends in TMA, this is going to be our last webinar for this year. And I extend a warm welcome to you all. I hope you had a great TMA year this year. And welcome on and all to this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Vinod Manjula. Now, may I call upon Dr. C.A. Shantakumar, the past president of Thrissur Management Association and committee member of Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, for the special address and introduction of the chief guest, Mr. T.P. Srinivasan.
Yeah, good evening, all of you. It is very heartening to hear from the president that TMA and Indo-American Chamber of Commerce is having a very cordial and healthy relationship. And it is actually a very good mutual win-to-win situation for both the organizations. Because for TMA, Thrissur is known for having developed several entrepreneurs. And we have several like Mr. Vinod Manjula to take an example. Then starting from Yusuf Ali, Muhammad Ali, or Kalyan, or Josko, or Alukas, you name them, they are all from Thrissur. So Indian Chamber of Commerce, American Chamber of Commerce is an organization which is a chamber of commerce, which main objective is to promote the trade between India and the United States. And I have worked in the National Committee as a board member, and there I have seen the organization is very keen in promoting the trade relationship. And we have been organizing various meetings with the entrepreneurs. And also we will be interacting with the embassy people for organizing visas and other things for the members. And recently the Kapil Kaul, our national president, had come to Cochin and met a lot of business people and trying to resolve their problems. So it is in the interest of the businessmen in Kerala, in Thrissur, to interact with IACC so that you will be able to promote your products and all that. And if you talk to the IACC, the office bearers and all that and others, they will be able to organize meetings. And we also interact with the embassy people, the ambassadors and all that whenever they visit us. And so that way we can take it forward. So it will be a win-win situation for both the organizations. So I feel that I would go one step further and say that TMA should take a membership in IACC and all those members who are in the business so that the relationship can be strengthened further. And coming to the topic of today, the topic is of Indo-US relationship in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war. As like Mr. Vinod said, you have seen the tectonic shift in the geopolitical scenario where China is rising and becoming a competitor to the US in the relationship. And also the economic, it has also an impact on the economic and the military relationship between the two nations. Because earlier, after the Second World War, when there was a Cold War between Russia and America, India used to take a stand which is non-aligned. We are neither this side or that side. So with the change scenario, with the formation of the organizations like the Quad and all that, whether we can remain isolated or we have to take sides either with the US or with others, or has to be decided. And we have the first person to talk on the topic, Mr. Srinivasan. He's an authority on the topic. And Mr. Srinivasan, sir, needs no introduction because he is known, and people who have not met him personally, his fame would have already preceded him and reached him. But as a formality, I'll just read out his profile. That is a former ambassador and permanent representative of India in United Nations, Vienna, and governor for India of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Vienna, ambassador to Austria and Slovenia. Mr. Srinivasan sir has served in Indian Foreign Service for over 37 years. He has nearly 20 years of experience in multilateral diplomacy and has represented India at a number of international conferences organized by the UN, the Commonwealth, the Non-Aligned Movement. He has chaired several UN committees and conferences. He is the author of 7 books: Words, 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 Adventures in Diplomacy, Encounters Mattering to India, Applied Diplomacy Through the Prism of Mythology, Education of an Ambassador, Vengat Forever, and Modi plus more diplomacy, Modi's diplomacy. He has coined the word Modi's diplomacy as more diplomacy. I have listened to Srinivasan sir on several occasions at KMA and other forums, and I have noticed that lucidity and straightforwardness has always marked the utterance of his style. His writings and speeches stands distinguished as much by the felicity of his language as by the profundity of his thoughts. So we have the best person to talk on the topic. And with these few words, I introduce to you Mr. Srinivasan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shantakumar. Now, may I call upon our chief guest and an excellent orator, so I've heard, Mr. T.P. Srinivasan, IFS, to talk on the India-US relationships in the wake of Russia-Ukraine war. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President Manjula, our Master of Ceremonies, Sujata, who is behind all this, and all other distinguished guests. Thank you for asking me to spend some time with you to talk about a subject which is close to my heart. Out of my 37 years in diplomacy, I spent 10 in the United States. This is an unprecedented experience. No foreign service officer has so far done 3 stints in the United States. So I have a responsibility to understand and also put across the reality of India-US relations, particularly at this critical time. As you know, Prime Minister Modi has just been to the G7 meeting, and we do not yet have the full details of what happened there. But that must have been a very difficult meeting for him, because the G7 is completely opposed to Russia and are determined to save Ukraine whatever it takes. And he, of course, has consistently advocated peace, diplomacy, and conflict resolution rather than war. And he has also refused to take sides, like in some other issues which the president referred to. So it must have been a difficult meeting for him, just as he was in another meeting a day before, of the BRICS countries. BRICS, as you know, it is Brazil, China, India, Russia, and South Africa. There again, there is a big contradiction, because since BRICS was formed, Russia and China have become allies, and that has completely upsets the balance in the BRICS countries. BRICS was formed as a group of countries which are on the same state of development and becoming fast-growing economies. It was not a political grouping at all, but it had become a political grouping in the sense that Russia, China, and these other three countries developed a kind of non-Western, I will not say anti-West, but a non-Western perspective. And that has also been completely destroyed because of the Russian position and the Chinese alliance with it. The pandemic, of course, upset everybody. We do not know where each country stands, which country is in greater danger of being destroyed or resurrected. The situation is far from clear. So I just mentioned these as some examples of how the world has changed, as the president mentioned. And the extent of it and the changes it will bring on the global scene are yet to be realized, not even visualized at this point, because anything could change. Looking at India-US relations, the common saying is that these relations have always been like a roller coaster ride. I know many of you must have been roller coasters, at least when we were children. The roller coaster goes up very, very slowly, and you hold your breaths to wait for the point when you will fall. And then it falls, it shocks you completely, because you had not anticipated that it would be such a fall. And it goes down even below the level where we started. And then the roller coaster again starts moving up slowly and gradually, and it falls again. And this has been consistent with India-US relations right from the beginning. We have been on this roller coaster ride. Another saying is that India was till recently, or India and United States were till recently antagonistic democracies, estranged democracies, right through the Cold War. And then after the Cold War, we became engaged democracies. And we are going through that process for a long time. There again, there have been the roller coaster effect. It went up and down. And so we were anticipating and embraced democracies between India and the United States, the formation of the Quad, which was formed particularly as a result of what the Chinese did on our line of actual control after the arrival of the pandemic. We have been going slow on the Quad or any kind of organization which has military implications. But in 2020, it became very clear to us that we need strong friends. And that is why, though reluctantly, because we are the only country which has a common border with China in Quad, so we knew that the pressure, the force of Chinese antagonism will come to us first. And therefore, we made this choice and became a member of the Quad. And we started having a very good defense relationship with the United States, which of course was begun in 2015, 2014. And after Narendra Modi came to power, it became a very, very close association. We signed many defense agreements, which we were reluctant to do at the time of even Dr. Manmohan Singh. Even after the nuclear deal, which created a new chapter in the history of India-US relations, we had differences, but on defense partnership and on Make in India and so many other areas, we built a very strong relationship. But now, the situation in Ukraine has completely changed the scene. Everybody knows that India has been close to Soviet Union and later Russia for various reasons, more practical reasons than ideological reasons. Because we have to look at our relationship with the Soviet Union from the perspective of our needs at the time of the Cold War and how the Western countries had completely dissociated themselves with us, except in some cultural, some trade, some scientific collaboration. But the West was not willing to give us sophisticated technology. The West did not purchase any of the consumer goods from India. And so we were in a very tight spot at that time in our early stages of development. And the only country which was willing to buy our consumer goods and also supply us technology with facility for independent manufacturing was the Soviet Union. And that too, it was a rupee-ruble arrangement. So it was not a partnership, strategic partnership, or an alliance with the Soviet Union, but a real necessity of friends in need. And this was understood by the West. In fact, during the Cold War, they were not happy, of course, with the relationship that we had with the Soviet Union. And they had a similar objectionable relations with Pakistan to balance it out. And that generated many problems for us. But there was a certain amount of understanding of the compulsions of both sides. So during the Cold War, even though India was dependent on 80% of our military equipment from the Soviet Union, the United States did not protest too much about it. They understood it and they accepted in a certain way because they still wanted to develop a relationship in other aspects with India. We did not go fully in support of the Soviet Union in various things. Their idea of collective security in Asia was not accepted by us. There were several cooperative measures that Soviet Union suggested which had a political implication. We did not accept it. But as a practical diplomatic effort from, say, 1962 to 1990, we had a relationship with the Soviet Union which the United States more or less understood and decided to live with. At the end of the Cold War, the situation changed because Soviet Union broke up and it was not in a position to promote our interests or to be helpful to us beyond a point. And the world became a unipolar world, with the United States being the only superpower and Russia becoming virtually a client state of the United States during the time of Yeltsin. India-Russia relations followed the same track as before because of the complementarity, I wouldn't say dependability, but complementarity of the two countries' interests. But that was nothing like what we had with the Soviet Union. On the other hand, Mr. Narasimha Rao took very brave actions, like other countries in the world, to be as close to the United States as possible. So from 1992, particularly after Mr. Narasimha Rao's visit to the United States in 1993, our relationship with the United States became very strong. And one of the first things we did was to normalize our relations with Israel. Because Israel is one country which determines US actions in the world. Because Israel has a very deep influence in American situation. Because there are more Jews in New York than in Israel, as you know. That is why we call it Jew York and Jew York Times when we talk about New York and New York Times. Decisive influence. And nothing happens in the world without agreement between US and Israel because of their close connections. And our linkages with Palestine was not very helpful in this process, though we had a healthy relationship with Israel, which is not very well known even at that time. But Mr. Narasimha Rao saw the point and immediately established an embassy in Tel Aviv, which paid big dividends, great dividends to India-US relationship. And it grew dramatically in those years. And it continued, particularly after Prime Minister Narendra Modi took office. There was some reluctance on the part of the UPA governments not to embrace the United States too much, because at times they were partners of the leftist forces in India. And in fact, you may remember that the leftist ministers and others left the UPA coalition on account of the nuclear deal, which they thought was a sell-off to the United States. Still, what the US wanted to shift, as it were, their presence from the Pacific to the Indian Ocean. Dr. Manmohan Singh was reluctant because he thought that that would basically change our approach to China, because China is the threat in Asia-Pacific region, and America's interest was to shift its power balance into the Asia-Pacific, which now they call Indo-Pacific. It was the Americans who gave that name. And so he was reluctant rather to be completely overawed by the Americans in the Indian Ocean, and he kept some options open. But Mr. Modi, who was refused visa by the Americans for 4 years. In fact, only time I met Mr. Modi was in 1999 when he came to Washington as a General Secretary of the BJP. And I had a good meeting with him, and I realized he was going to be a major force in Indian politics at that time. And after that, he tried to come several times, even as Chief Minister, to come to the United States, but he was not given a visa. Any other person would have taken a bitter vow that I will never go to the United States or something similar. But when Prime Minister Modi announced his 4 pillars of his foreign policy, that is development, security, neighborhood, and Indian diaspora abroad. No other Prime Minister had spelled out these priorities so clearly. And if you look at all these 4 requirements of the government of India, India's needs, everything leads to the United States. Whether it is security, development, Indian diaspora, neighborhood, in all this, the key belongs to the US. And that's why he went, the earliest opportunity, he went to the United States and became very friendly with Barack Obama. And he demonstrated the strength of the Indian community's influence in the United States on the first day. In fact, before he met Barack Obama in the White House, he had this big show in the Madison Square Garden in New York, where the Indian community put up the biggest show on earth, which was watched by President Barack Obama on television. And the next day when he went into the White House, the first thing that Obama said to Mr. Modi was that you are a rock star, Mr. Prime Minister in the United States, which meant the message went home to Barack Obama, and sky was the limit as far as they were concerned. And so the India-US relationship underwent a huge change. The nuclear deal was one, and we were supposed to import large number of nuclear stations because all the bans were lifted. But unfortunately, Indian Parliament adopted a law, an act of Parliament, which set the responsibility for any liability on account of nuclear reactors on the supplier country and not on the operating country, which is against international law. International law is that once you sell something to a customer, the customer has to take care of it. If you buy a car from Toyota, its responsibility ends once they fulfill the guarantee portions of the deal. But to decide that any loss, any liability which will be sustained on account of any accident in these reactors should go to the supplier, the manufacturer, rather than the operator, was against the law of the United States. So we had another fall, another roller coaster fall at that time. And Mr. Obama went back disappointed because he could not sell his nuclear reactors. We also did not buy the fighter jets that they were trying to sell to us. And the American ambassador got transferred back to the United States because of his failure to get these things done. And then came the revival again. Mr. Modi went to United States again. And that is where a deal was made that we would involve more into the Indian Ocean region and cooperate together. And the Quad idea was always there, but it was not materialized because of our own reluctance. And that is the reason why, I don't know whether many of you know about it, that President Obama came to India on a second visit in 2015. This is very unusual. No American president has ever come to India twice. Because the American tradition is, if a president goes to India, then every year they should celebrate the anniversary of the visit rather than get the president again. And he also came for the Republic Day, which many people thought was a security risk because he was going to sit on the Rajpath when when the Russian jets were going to fly over him. It was considered a major risk by the American security authorities. But he risked it all and came to India because the promise given to him by Mr. Modi that there will be an understanding, and there was an understanding, an agreement was signed, raising the level of our cooperation in the ocean region. And of course, it would have gone much further if the Democrats had continued and the Barack Obama policy had continued, but there was a big change when President Trump came, and nobody knew how it would develop. But Mr. Modi lost no time in building a relationship with President Trump, in spite of all his oddities and peculiarities and problems that he created. And before we knew, it was a kind of bromance between Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump, which surprised everybody. And Mr. Trump declared his determination to support India in the case of aggression against China. And in 2020, when it happened, he actually proved it, that he would be willing to help us, if necessary, militarily on the border, though we did not ask for it. So after that, of course, Prime Minister Modi had expected President Trump to win again, but didn't. But then Democrats have been friends of India. And that relationship has continued till the Ukraine war broke out. Because I'm saying this in some rather detail about the past, because we should not be surprised by what's going on at present. Because we have gone through a long period of ups and downs in the relationship. And we have never reached a plateau. Every time we thought that this is it, now the relationship cannot be reversed, then something would happen. And first it was our nuclear test in 1998. Then it was all repaired in 2000. Clinton came to India. There are so many of these in events which transform the relationship in one way or the other. And we have, in fact, come to that stage in this particular situation. We don't seem to have recognized it, or we don't seem to have acknowledged it, that the relationship is going through a tough time. And this particular time, the change is also because the Americans thought that now that we are members of the Quad, which is in their minds an alliance, they did not expect that India would take a position which is very different from the other three members of Quad. So in every statement that they made, whether the Europeans or the Americans made, they kept saying that our Quad partner has been shaking. That was the word that President Biden used initially. India is a bit shaky and we'll have to talk to them, etc., etc. But then it became more difficult when the vote came in the Security Council, when we abstained. Even in the General Assembly, we abstained. We refused to condemn the United States, even though we stated the principle, condemn the Russia, even though we declared all the principles that Russia must abide by it. But something broke somewhere in this new context. And probably that was the reason why, even after the Quad was formed, the Americans formed another alliance, what is called AUKUS, where there are only Western countries in it. And there is another Quad where we are with Israel and UAE with the United States. So there are now 3 Quads. And these are all supposed to strengthen our relationship with the United States. But the seriousness of the American concern about Russian action is something which is unprecedented. Not only that, the other reason why there is a difficulty in India-US relations is the decision of the NATO and the United States not to fight a war with the Russians. A military conflict was avoided. And instead, they decided to impose unprecedented sanctions against Russia, which will cripple Russia's economy and will bring it to its knees. And that's a policy they adopted. And naturally, they expected countries like India to cooperate in it. Not to the extent of isolating Russia, because even NATO and United States cannot isolate Russia completely. They need their gold, they need their oil, they need various things from Russia and its partners. Ukraine itself is a major ally of the United States. But the fact that NATO was being challenged by Moscow, not only on the question of NATO being controlled and not brought to the borders of Russia. In fact, there was an understanding when the Soviet Union collapsed that no previous republics of the Soviet Union will be allowed to join NATO. That was a written understanding that Yeltsin was given. But then Russia was not in a position to enforce it. And therefore, for 20 years, from 2000 onwards, Mr. Putin was trying to figure out a solution for this. Meanwhile, several former republics and former Eastern Bloc countries joined NATO. And so he reached a point when he felt, when there was an unfriendly government in Ukraine, that if Ukraine also joined NATO, it would be a huge problem because NATO forces will be on their borders directly. So he raised that issue of security, but no search for security for yourself can be an excuse to destroy somebody else's sovereignty. And that's a principle which everybody is supposed to follow. But Putin's dream exceeds that. It is not security alone that he is looking for. In his speech he made just before the invasion, he talked about his vision of a resurrection of the Soviet Union. Not a Communist Party controlled Soviet Union, but the race of the Tsars, Russia, the old Russian Empire. He wants to bring it back. It's a total foolish dream. The world is not going to change that much, even if he tries to do so. So from a range of demands, starting from security for itself, to the creation of the Soviet Union once again, the demands are far too serious for the United States or NATO to accept. And what hurt them most was the fact that we continued to buy oil and also try to arrange alternative arrangements for payments to Russia. These were required for us because we need the oil, and the Russian oil was very cheap. Why shouldn't we buy it? Similarly, if we have to deal with Russia and the open market system, the open banking system is not available, what should we do other than creating a new system? But United States and its allies, the NATO countries, are seeing this as our bursting the sanctions against Russia. This is how they see it. Mr. Jaishankar has been very forthright about this. He told at one time that, Europe buys one afternoon the amount of oil we have bought in 4 months, things like that. No, just to show that we are not alone in this. But all this has not satisfied the US thinking about it. And the longer the war continues, the longer the fight becomes difficult, this problem is going to rise. And we should realize that we have already made some adjustments here and there. We condemned the massacre at Bucha or Bucha, the place where thousands of Ukrainians were murdered. And also we have been insisting on peace and not victory on any side. The Prime Minister said, no side will win in this war. And our cooperation with the United States has not suffered on the question of climate change, on the question of the pandemic. Those things have gone on. But the reality is that we are again at the depth of a roller coaster ride. And how this will be resolved will depend on how the war will go. In spite of this, Mr. Modi was invited to the G7 meeting. As you know, G7 is the most powerful countries of the world. At one time, Russia was invited, but they were thrown out. And India has had a contact with G7 because individually all these countries, we have a very good relationship. And they still invited Mr. Modi to G7. But what we saw there was that G7 issued a declaration on Ukraine in the presence of Mr. Modi. Of course, Mr. Modi is not part of it because he's not a member of G7. So you can imagine how much painful it may have been for him to be there. But he was greeted very warmly. I'm sure they would have privately asked him what we were going to do. But he has come back unscathed. He has built his bridges with these countries, hopefully. And then he went to UAE because he had another problem there because of the statements made by some BJP functionaries. And its impact in the Gulf countries and the Islamic world was much bigger than we had anticipated. UAE, which is our strongest partner, the biggest trading partner, member of the Western Quad with Israel and the United States. Mr. Modi has already visited 4 times the UAE and received great warm reception because 3.5 million Indians are in that country. So at one point, it looked as though the whole thing was going to collapse. But they needed us as much as we do. And we took very firm actions against these 2 individuals. And India itself, God forbid, nothing serious happened. So that gave an opportunity to visit UAE and hopefully, the feathers were smoothened out. So, and that has a link with, Islamic world has a link with United States also. Because at the same time when Islamic world was criticizing us on the statements against the Prophet, the Secretary of State of the United States was also raising issues of religious freedom in India. And that was an added problem for us. Of course, the Americans always talked about religious freedom in India, even in the best of times. But at this particular time when India was facing this kind of criticism from the Islamic world, particularly the GCC countries, the Americans were trying to hurt us. And of course, we reacted by saying that we also have reasons to be concerned about the way Indians are treated in the United States. We have never said this before. So on the whole, what I try to give you is a real picture of the situation, which is not always so described either in official channels or on newspapers, but we can sense it rather than. In my own conversations and communications with my old friends in authority, whether they are Democrats or, and they have this big question all the time: why India? Why do you need to be so, what shall we say, nitpicking? And why is it that we are not able to make any adjustment in our relationship with Russia? And these questions, they ask us friends, not as enemies. And they have not given up hope. But it is not in our hands. If this war becomes prolonged and they come under pressure and Russia is seen to be escaping the effects of sanctions, the pressure will come on us even more. So that is why I volunteered to speak about this, because since the India-American Chamber of Commerce is interested in good relations. Of course, the business will continue, educational collaboration will continue. There are so many things happening between India and the United States. But the sensitive issue of the time we have to bear in mind and do what we can. And I think the Prime Minister is doing a lot in order to reassure the Americans that we are not against them. But the Americans have this peculiar way of saying, if you are not with us, you are against us. Right from 1947, they have been saying this. And when Pandit Nehru went to the United States, the president asked him a question. Mr. Nehru, are you with us or against us? You know what Pandit Nehru said? Yes. You don't know what that means. He did not answer that question. Because he could not have answered that question. If he said he is non-aligned, they would not accept it. But when he said yes, they did not know how to react. They did not understand what he was saying. So it has continued from then onwards. So we have to sometimes say yes and nothing else when it comes to that. But there are basic strengths in our relationship. United States does not have another democratic country in Asia to stand with them, to join with them in containing China in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, Australia and Japan are their allies already. But a huge democratic country which has the ability to withstand Chinese threats and efforts. We are going to be a big partner of the United States eventually. But before that, Ukraine has to be resolved. Before that, we have to see what China is going to do with Taiwan and what Russia will do in that event. Because Americans will fight a war if you touch Taiwan. Then it will be a global war. There could be nuclear weapons used. We cannot overrule it. So Ukraine and Taiwan are very crucial in the days to come, not to speak about the pandemic. And therefore, India's position is not enviable, but we can hope and pray that these things will resolve themselves and the roller coaster will slowly rise again. So I can stop there and then answer questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Srinivasan, sir. That was a wonderful session. Your rich experience in diplomacy and with the UN and foreign relationships, adds a lot to the insight that we could gather from you in the session. Now the floor is open for questions. I would request the audience to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Anand Menon here.
Yes.
Wonderful session, Ambassador Srinivasan. I really enjoyed it. I would like to know, a small country like Singapore, which is more dependent on United States for everything, has taken a stand something like India. Can they survive? Because I listened to Hard Talk this afternoon, and the minister was replying in a way which they were not totally supporting United States. Of course, Ukraine war should end fast, and India depends a lot on Ukrainian oil. But this war and stand taken by a small country like Singapore, do you think we can shift to US side so easily at this time?
Well, it's not easy. I hope you understood that, what we can do. It has its limitations. We cannot forget that Soviet Union's veto saved us 5 times in the UN. Are you aware of that? How can we forget that? UN would have waged a war against India in Kashmir if there was no Soviet veto.
Yes.
They would have fought a war against us in Goa. There would have been a war against us in Bangladesh. So this history. And we cannot forget these things in spite of whatever is happening. And we cannot compare ourselves with Singapore. Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew had always followed a very unique policy of equidistance between United States and China. He had very good relations with China. And in fact, he was very critical of India as to why India is not able to manage things the way he did. But then it was a small country, its requirements are much less. Their own prosperity is great. They can match the United States in terms of per capita income. So Singapore can take more independent decisions. But in our case, as I said, we have a huge baggage of history. And it is very difficult to break away from it. Singapore or no Singapore.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Sir, my name is Shantakumar. Sir, I have to ask a couple of questions. First one is, you are mentioning about the oil that is being purchased by India from Russia. If it is a Ukraine war that wants US to not to buy oil from Russia, Why are they bringing embargo on buying Iranian oil and then Venezuela oil from Venezuela? So that's puts us in a very difficult spot. Secondly, for any country, their long-term strategic relationship should be to protect the interests of own country. So India is doing best to get oil at a cheap rate to protect its own interest. Am I right?
Yes, and that we have been saying it very openly. But then you can't control the other person's reaction. Right?
Yeah, that's
So this is why I always say that there is nothing called an independent foreign policy. You know, our minister has started talking about it. We never talked about an independent foreign policy before. Because foreign policy has a constituency. You cannot stand back and say, let the BJP say whatever about Prophet Muhammad, we won't care about it. Can you say that? Similarly, can you say that we will not condemn an act of aggression by another country? So, by saying that we are independent and shout from the rooftops is not very helpful. We have to play the game which suits the international community. And we have never been reluctant to stand alone, like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We are virtually alone against the whole world. We haven't minded the inconveniences we had all these years. We are a virtual pariah in the Atomic Energy Agency where I was. You know, some aspects of the Atomic Energy Agency were close to me. I could not go there because I had not signed the NPT. And we are the builders of the Atomic Energy Agency. Bhabha built it. And imagine the Indian ambassador cannot visit one section of the IAEA. It's ridiculous. But we stood by it. And my best friends in Vienna were Pakistani and Israeli ambassadors, whom you don't even probably talk to when you are in other places. Because we used to coordinate our votes against the NPT. So such strange situations arise. And so even if we argue that this is in our interests, that may not necessarily satisfy them. Okay. And that's why I thought that this was something serious. They understand this. They buy. Europeans buy. What Jaishankar said was right. They buy much more oil. And now they are talking about controlling gold exports. They have not banned it as yet. So even when they are doing for their own interest, they are making some concessions. But they say, when they say, talk to us, well, we may do it, but why? You are our friend. You are a squad member. This is how play on our emotional nerves. And so that will continue.
So another question is, now that Pakistan, earlier America was very close to Pakistan. Now Pakistan has moved closer to China. So whatever we do, America cannot just totally ignore us and then take a stand which is antagonist to us.
No, the United States will do no harm to us. I never suggested that. What I was saying was that the warmth in the relationship and their expectations of us, when it wanes or reduces, it will reflect in policy. You know, like Obama, how he went back from India when he was, he could not sell reactors because he was contesting for a second term. And if the, growth rate and trade is not good, he could not have been elected to as a second time. Yeah. So these $10 billion for reactors and another $10 billion for fighter aircraft was important for him because that would create 40,000 jobs in the United States. And if the unemployment rate goes above 7%, no president can win an election. It was close to 8%. So for Obama, it was a life and death issue. The selling of reactors and selling of fighter jets. But we took a determined position. We said we cannot buy these jets because you already have supplied it to Pakistan. That's why I did not buy. And the other was our law. Our law could not be changed. In a different situation, it would have been a total embrace at that time. So these things happen. And we all contain it over a period of time because there are some unchangeable mutuality of interest between India and the US.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else?
We can take one more question, one or two more questions.
George Paul, unmute. George Paul, unmute.
Okay. Nice listening to you, sir. My question is, in the history, we have seen that from a unipolar to bipolar to multipolar, it's like a roller coaster ride, the world order, the balance of power also shifting. Now, in future, it's going to be a multipolar order because now we are seeing US, so Russia is coming back, then India is becoming with the inherent advantage of demographic dividend or demand or democracy. And then Middle East is becoming another block. So is this order, multipolar order is going to prevail for a longer period? That's my first question. And second part is that with India, and we are seeing in the balance of power equations also technology, space technology, economy, but there are so many other variables are also coming over a period of time, like oil and gas from Russia supplying to European Union, India because of the middle class, huge demand and the younger population. So how these things are going to shape up the multipolar world order and what is going to be the role of India in the future?
Well, just about the multipolar world, that was a dream. And that dream is not to be realized very soon.
Okay.
I have written in my book, More Diplomacy, as to what his objectives would be in the second term, because that was only about the first 5 years of his foreign policy. And I believed and I wrote that he has the vision of a multipolar world. And that was actually defined by Jayashankar's father, Mr. K. Subramaniam. K. Subramaniam said that India, the world will have 6 poles in the future. United States, Russia, China, Japan, and India. So these would be the countries that will become prominent. And that is how this BRICS was formed, fastest growing developing nations, big nations, etc. So we expected that there would be a conflict or at least an uneasy relationship between United States and China. And we did not consider the possibility of Russia becoming one. So India, Russia, United States, Russia, European Union, the 6th is European Union, 27 countries. So these are already established. 3 of them already there. Japan is almost there. And China is not looking for second position, they are looking for the first position, so there will be a conflict. And India's position will be somewhere with Russia, because Russia had become a, shall we say, secondary power. And as a result, Russia may not be able to wield a pole as such, because they don't have any East European bloc anymore. And therefore, India would have a position which will bring together not only Russia, but also Germany, France, Italy, etc., who will neither be part of US or part of China. This was our hope. And that is what is being reordered. So what the new multipolar world will be, there is no clear idea. Our idea of a 6 poles does not appear to be in the offing, because Russia is now allied with China. So if Russia and China become aligned and become a big pole, US itself will be secondary. Then where is the position of India? Where is the position of the Islamic world, etc.? So it's going to be a thorough reorientation. And that is why I've been writing that this is not the time for us to go to groupings, BRICS here, G7 there, Quad there, because we go there and say what we want and come away. There is no meeting of minds with any of these people. So bilateral meetings is what we have to concentrate on. Build bridges with individual countries. Went to UAE was the best thing that happened. Go to the US, go to the French. So bilateral consultations which would reassure each other. Because the Americans' biggest worry at the time of our nuclear test was that we might use it against United States. You know, we have the capacity. And it took us 2 long years for Mr. Jaswant Singh to prove to them that we have no such intention. We had no such intention even to destroy Pakistan. Our target was China. We were not saying it, but finally we had to say it to them, which ruined our relation with China altogether. Because the Americans told them, oh, we know the Indians are not against us, they're against you. So there are so many imponderables and variables. So I'm not so sure of the 6-point multipolar world. But Russia change towards China is a major factor in all this. What President Biden thought was that he will settle with Russia, make peace in Europe, and then turn to China. He has not formulated a China policy as yet. He went to Geneva, that was his first trip, to speak to Putin, thinking that is a potential friend. And that is what Trump kept saying, saying that, oh, Putin will be a poodle in our lap. But it didn't happen. So he is completely surprised by what happened. And so China is waiting to see what he'll do with China. And so it's an uncertain world even more.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Just a hypothetical question. If Donald Trump was to be the president, do you think he would have had the same policy with Russia, Ukraine, what he would have taken the same stand?
Well, he may have declared war on us.
Okay.
Hypothetically, because he's not going to be lie low with Biden and complaining you are shaky and all that. He'll probably send a missile straight because he is that crazy.
Sir, if I may ask a question, because the futurologists were saying that the next world war will be between Islamic countries and the Christian-dominated countries. But what we see now is the war is between a Christian country with another Christian country. So
Europe still remains the center of wars.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what's happening. But the Islamic world rivalry will not go to that extent. Islamic world has very close connections with the West. They live with Western comforts, Western money in the banks. That is what gives them power. So even if Osama bin Laden may have bombed New York, but he had business interests with Bush, that. Billions of dollars of his was, and it was all the Al-Qaeda people were, the Saudi Arabians who came with Osama's people were shifted out in one night from the US. Imagine the influence. They were not even tried or arrested. All those who were suspected to be bin Laden people were sent out of the country before the case was registered on 9/11. That is why some people say that Bush actually colluded with the Islamic world to do this, to his own country. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. But even such theories exist. So Islamic world will not go into a confrontation with the West. It's not in their interest.
I think we can take one more last question if you are okay with time, Srinivasan.
No, I'm all right.
Okay.
Dinner
Let's take one last question.
Sure.
Any more questions? Okay, if not, let's get to the vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to start thanking the president of TMA, Vinod Manjula, for presiding over the meeting. Next, I would like to thank the chief guest, Mr. T.P. Srinivasan, for the excellent session. As I said earlier, the insight that you have on account of your career, the long career with the UN and being the ambassador of India, being in diplomatic relations and foreign relations, it's wonderful, tremendous. It's not easy to come by. So we thoroughly enjoyed the session. Thank you once again, sir. I would like to thank IACC and Sujata for coordinating and making it happen. Srinivasan sir was contacted by IACC and we joined hands with them. So thanks to IACC. I would like to thank Dr. Shantakumar for the wonderful introduction given, and also everyone in the audience, including the managing committee members of TMA and IACC, and everyone else in the audience for joining today. Have a great evening. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.